I kept getting sent this one video of him kind of like shouting and, we abiogenesis, I should know. I'm an organic chemist, so I know the most about this.
I'm a synthetic organic chemist. Origin of life is purely synthetic organic chemistry. There's no way around it. I'm perfectly situated to be commenting on this, to be critiquing the origin of life research.
Shouting and I should know. I'm an organic chemist, so I know the most about this, even though he knows nothing about astrochemistry, geochemistry, systems chemistry, all the fields that are actually really pertinent to origin of life research.
It is abiological. It is before biology takes over. This is purely synthetic organic chemistry.
So this is actually also what I was studying. Now, he's good. He's a good chemist. I was not. I didn't even finish the advanced degree. But it's also what I studied. And so I have somewhat of an elevated ability to comprehend origin of life research, though I'm far from an expert. But as it turns out, James also does not really know much about the field because he's hiding from it.
So go ahead, ask your synthetic chemist friends to listen to what I have to say. If they have anywhere a master's degree or beyond in synthetic organic chemistry, have them critique what I say.
He has the intellectual capacity to comprehend the field, but instead of looking into systems chemistry and things like that, he just shouts, there's no selection with molecules, and just like basically discredits an entire field of science that he's never looked into.
Scientists think that other scientists understand all of this, but they do not. In fact, the people that might disagree with me are biologists because they've never made anything. The only thing they may have made is they buy a kit and they make it, which is made by chemists, but they've never made anything ab initio.
For the sake of the audience here today, could you just tell us his core argument and why it is false?
Yeah, I mean, well, number one would be I'm a synthetic organic chemist, therefore I should understand origin of life research the best. No.
In this ooze emerged the first life.
I find it problematic in that there's an extrapolation from a very small experiment in a laboratory.
Researchers have now created life from non-living parts.
There were many kinds of molecules in the primordial soup.
I'm boiling up some primordial soup.
Your entire civilization, it all begins right here in this little pond of goo.
Let's dig into what James can't grasp, since autocatalytic cycles are the key to continuously developing organized structures of increasing complexity, beginning with physical phenomena, followed by chemical phenomena, then autocatalytic cycles, and finally living systems. Autocatalytic systems are truly the crucial step in the selection process of the molecules of life. Autocatalysis is at the basis of life. In general, this concept of selection on the molecular scale goes way beyond the traditional chemistry James clings to in his videos. This is precisely why a background in synthetic chemistry is not the best suited for understanding origin of life, because it in no way encapsulates the processes involved. Selection is at the basis of the origin of life. If there could be just one thing that researchers in this field agree on, it would probably be the fact that autocatalysis is a central element in the emergence of life, which provides a common theme between chemistry and biology, and that the process of biological evolution began with chemical systems, not with living systems. This should make it quite clear how James is just desperately spinning his wheels by spending the majority of his series whining about synthetic laboratory practices, because autocatalytic systems render all of his objections totally irrelevant. Every time he brings up low yields in his series, he shows how clueless he is.
And so that compound was in 34% yield, so you got a bunch of other compounds.
Yes, if you do a reaction in the lab and your yield is 10%, and same for the next step, you get a lot of crap. But with an autocatalytic loop, even with a 10% yield for a reaction the first time around, at the end of many cycles, all the useless impurities that are not reproducing will have purged themselves spontaneously, and you will have highly purified products. This is what allows a soup of chemicals to converge toward molecules of biological significance. This is how abiogenesis works. If James wants to get out of his sad little box and actually learn about this field, he has to dig into the literature on autocatalysis.
So, Steve Benner, this is the guy that you aligned yourself with. This is the guy. This guy says that yields aren't a problem, because these reactions would just skip into autocatalytic mode and they'd purify themselves. Not in your lab, but out there in some pool somewhere on the side of the ocean. Don't whine about an enantiomeric excess, chirality. No problem, because those just start through an autocatalytic cycle. They get better and better. This is the guy that you aligned yourself with.
Now, we already talked about how pointless it is to be complaining about low yields given autocatalysis, and the same goes for enantiomeric excess in this case. The conclusions of this paper are clear to everyone but James.
Okay, Steve, you don't need to worry about yields. You don't need to worry about chirality, because autocatalytic cycles takes care of all of this. This is the guy that you've aligned yourself with. He doesn't know what he's talking about, and you know it. Aren't you sorry you came on his program?
Suffice it to say that James does not have a clue about it, or again just fell prey to thinking like a synthetic chemist, which is what prompts such embarrassing blunders on his part.
So when you're a synthetic chemist, there are all these blunders. Doesn't work for synthetic chemistry. That's not a good background. Let's see who Dave Farina brings on his program.
In addition to Lee, I was able to speak with Stephen Benner, a former Harvard professor, founder of the Foundation for Applied Molecular Evolution, the first person to ever synthesize a gene, and an enormous figure in this field.
Dave goes ahead and brings in Steve Benner. And did you know Steve Benner is a synthetic organic chemist?
This is precisely why a background in synthetic chemistry is not the best suited for understanding origin of life.
You're bringing on Steve Benner, who's a synthetic organic chemist. Something you just said, synthetic chemists are not able to handle this stuff. And then you bring on your expert, who's a synthetic chemist, who got his PhD with R.B. Woodward, who's a synthetic chemist himself. In your own words, Dave, oh, the irony.
And this is actually how chemists think about universals. It's not quite what you heard this morning from Sarah, where you're talking about sort of hypothetical information things. Chemistry is actually hard to get to work. The molecules precipitate, the molecules hydrolyze, the molecules decompose. And so it's very much a constraint that you have to deal with when you're trying to create artificial genetic systems.
He talks about molecules having real problems here. Let's look at another thing that he says.
But all the hard work is in the synthetic and analytical chemistry, the developing of the enzymology for these and all the rest of it. And as we like to say, now that I can use Gary's use of language, is one goddamn problem after another in that side of it.
What's the synthetic and analytical chemistry like? Tell us, how hard is that?
Is one goddamn problem after another.
What's that, Steve Benner, founder of the Foundation for Applied Molecular Evolution?
Is one goddamn problem after another.
How so?
So it's not quite what you heard this morning from Sarah, where you're talking about sort of hypothetical information things. Chemistry is actually hard to get to work.
What's that?
So it's not quite what you heard this morning from Sarah, where you're talking about sort of hypothetical information things. Chemistry is actually hard to get to work.
It's not just a bunch of theory?
Chemistry is actually hard to get to work.
Why?
The molecules precipitate, the molecules hydrolyze, the molecules decompose.
And so what?
So it's very much a constraint that you have to deal with.
How severe is that constraint?
Is one goddamn problem after another.
So, Steve Benner, autocatalysis is not solving your problem for you. Why is it so hard for you? Recall, he's an enormous figure in this field.
And an enormous figure in this field.
So he's an enormous figure in this field, a former Harvard professor, and he says that molecules are tough to make. Molecules hydrolyze, molecules decompose, molecules precipitate. Don't you know about autocatalysis? Things would go much better for you if you knew about autocatalysis. This would take care of all of your hydrolysis problems, take care of all the precipitation problems. Why do you complain about this? Why are you even complaining? Why didn't you just talk to Dave? Dave would have straightened you out on this. Dave would have told you about autocatalysis.
Remember autocatalysis?
This is what's prompting such embarrassing blunders on your part, Steve. You are a synthetic chemist.
Just fell prey to thinking like a synthetic chemist, which is what prompts such embarrassing blunders on his part.
You don't see it. Dave sees it, but you don't see it because you're a synthetic chemist.
Since autocatalytic cycles are the key to continuously developing organized structures of increasing complexity, beginning with physical phenomena, followed by chemical phenomena, then autocatalytic cycles, and finally living systems. Autocatalytic systems are truly the crucial step in the selection process of the molecules of life.
Steve, you should know this. You really should have known this.
Autocatalysis is at the basis of life.
Steve.
The conclusions of this paper are clear to everyone, but
Steve Benner.
Suffice it to say that
Steve
does not have a clue about it, or again just fell prey to thinking like a synthetic chemist, which is what prompts such embarrassing blunders on his part.
Steve Benner, that's your problem. That PhD is an albatross for you.
This is how abiogenesis works. If
Steve Benner
wants to get out of his sad little box and actually learn about this field, he has to dig into the literature on autocatalysis, which he is busy pretending is not relevant.
So Steve, this is the guy with whom you've aligned yourself, and you've conjoined your foundation. I think, Steve Benner, you need to hire this guy. You need to hire Dave Farina because he's got to figure it out. You don't know how to do this. We'll look at your chemistry. I mean, you're lost. You don't know how to get these things purified. You don't know how to set them up in autocatalytic cycles. Hire Dave Farina, because he's got to figure it out.
But with an autocatalytic loop, even with a 10% yield for a reaction the first time around, at the end of many cycles, all the useless impurities that are not reproducing will have purged themselves spontaneously, and you will have high...
Well, Tor's position is fundamentally what we would call God in the gaps. The God in the gaps argument, so which sort of is if we don't understand something, then it's not understandable.
Yeah, I noticed that they're maybe cleverly disguised. They don't seem like it, but they fundamentally are God of the gaps.
What is bad faith, you ask?
The hallmark of a bad faith argument is that it disguises the core point of a debate rather than addressing issues, beliefs, and values head-on. One example is the lie detector.
It's undeniable that he's not just not understanding science he doesn't want to understand. He's actively lying.
You complain that you being Christian isn't relevant, even though it totally is.
The lie detector knows what you really mean. After all, they already know what your position is.
He says wrong things because of his religion. That's why you only talk in front of ultra-religious people. You lie about science because of your religion.
But when you say your actual beliefs are something else entirely,
as a Christian, I cannot bring that into the classroom as a satisfying explanation. I have a duty to use the tools of science. I cannot, as a scientist, say that we will never solve this problem by naturalistic terms. What I can say is that we're nowhere close to figuring it out. I suspect that we will someday figure out how life was formed. One day in the distant future, I presume we will understand life's origin, but for now, we are nowhere close.
They have a choice, except that they have not accounted for the full spectrum of human belief about a topic, or accuse you of lying.
He's lying.
Lies through his teeth.
Because he knows he's lying. You're wrong in lying, you know.
The lie detector knows the truth.
It's easy for me to see through you because I'm not brainwashed.
Do not challenge the lie detector on any of these points. They know more about your beliefs, your life, and your work history than you ever will.
Because he's hiding from it. He has the intellectual capacity to comprehend the field. And by the way, here's why he's saying these things.
Your entire public identity is lying for Jesus.
I could never say that we'll never figure this out. God of the Gap says that we don't have an explanation, so we never will. If someone in the year 1700, you ask them, when are we going to have space flight? If they said, I don't know, maybe 250 years, they'd have been about right. Let's see what else Steve Benner had to say.
Tor doesn't seem to appreciate that gap filling has happened, and it doesn't even seem to appreciate that gap filling is what science actually does.
And then you take it even further.
Tor starts here, but he ends in a very different place, at least he wants to. He hopes to persuade his audience to conclude that life could not possibly have arisen from non-living matter without a literal miracle. He then wants his audience to conclude that anyone who suggests otherwise is ignorant or lying or stupid or perhaps all three.
Corrupt or, yeah.
Exactly.
I talked about literal miracles, didn't I? I'll also appeal to the funding agencies. You keep funding more of the same thing, to take a bunch of chemicals that people buy and they make a bunch of stereo-scrambled compounds that could never go by that route had it been a prebiotic earth. And you keep funding it. I don't know why you do that. Why don't you address some of the more fundamental issues here? There's problems with this sort of science. And so, I didn't even address the origin of life researchers themselves. I mean, these are good scientists. They're good scientists. I don't mean to come against them in any way, but I think that you have to come clean and talk about the state of the field where it really is. Because you ramp things up a little bit, and the press ramps it up an order of magnitude. You've got to ask them, let me see the article before you publish it, and many of them would let you do this, because this thing gets ramped up like crazy. What I want you to notice is I didn't mention God in any of this. I don't need to. Science itself tells us that abiogenesis, as it's proposed by naturalistic terms today, is unacceptable because it just doesn't work. You don't need to invoke God. You don't need to invoke intelligent designers. Just the naturalistic means. Science itself screams that abiogenesis, as it is proposed, is not the route to how life came about. Steve, I said it's not God of the gaps. It's just the science itself is not showing it. We don't need to discover religion to understand the facts of science. Abiogenesis is and science in itself. What video series were you watching?
I mean, Tor points out, and he's correct, that the atmosphere that Stanley Miller used in the 1950s to create amino acids by sparking lightning through primitive atmospheres, those atmospheres are not believed to have been present most of the time during the period of time, the Hadean, where Earth likely generated life. But, you know, we now know that there have been impacts on Earth. During those impacts, that atmosphere that was present was reduced, and actually it doesn't look very much different than Stanley Miller's atmosphere. And so for brief periods of time, after large meteors hit the Earth, there was a window of opportunity where life could have emerged, combining now the oxidized minerals and rocks on the ground, like borate, and the carbohydrates they generated with the bases like adenine and guanine that you learned in school.
No, that's not at all what I said. In fact, I said absolutely the opposite of what you just said. I gave you any atmosphere you want. Reducing, oxidizing. What video were you watching? What were you commenting on? And then I let you even talk a little bit, and you talk about how life could have arisen. And it's all fluff. Here's actually what I said regarding atmospheres. The Earth, just 500 million years after its creation, was not a methane-filled wasteland, as previously supposed, but instead was much closer to the conditions of our current atmosphere. So people used to think that, or many people may still think that the Earth was highly reducing, had ammonia, which is a highly reducing environment, and hydrogen sulfide, and so that there was very little oxygen around. And then it's more recently that people are suggesting no, that early Earth was probably more like it is now, closer to the conditions now. We don't know. We don't know. Nobody knows for sure because nobody was there. But I'll give you either. You want a reducing Earth? You want an oxidizing Earth? We'll take either. We'll do chemistry with either. See how far we can get. That doesn't inhibit me or my arguments at all. What were the conditions of early Earth? Well, whatever the conditions were, it did not consist of a pristine laboratory. There were no fine chemical producers where one could purchase the starting materials or reagents or buffers. Steve, you are clueless on what I actually said. I said I'll give you oxidizing, I'll give you reducing. I had a whole segment where I was citing top-notch literature saying that it could well have been oxidizing. What are you talking about? You obviously didn't watch my series. And then Dave, in the very same video that you're in, he even mentions this. And Dave himself didn't even notice it.
James stated multiple times that he would grant oxidizing or reducing conditions for abiogenesis.
You can get oxidizing or reducing. And Dave didn't even stop you by saying that when you claimed that I only said it was reducing.
From the 10 hours of video or so that I have watched it, as I would not consult James if I wanted enlightenment about the chemistry behind the origins of life.
What video series were you watching? You said that you watched 10 hours of it.
The 10 hours of video or so that I have watched.
But then you said to me, well, you know, you watched the 10 hours, but you weren't really paying attention. I'm going to be speaking today on the addressing abiogenesis and common misconceptions. This is going to be a series. Steve, you never watched my video series, and you know, that's the bottom line of what's going on.
He wants to, he hopes to persuade his audience to conclude that life could not possibly have arisen from non-living matter without a literal miracle. He then wants his audience to conclude that anyone who suggests otherwise is ignorant or lying or stupid or perhaps all three.
Corrupt or, yeah.
Would you call those comments of yours, would you, not me, but would you call those comments of yours ignorant, lying, or stupid, or maybe corrupt? When I specifically said that we're not talking God of the gaps here, and I presume one day we'll find this? I cannot, as a scientist, say that we will never solve this problem. So you never watched my video, and when I challenged you on this in an email, you wrote to me on December 29th, 2021 at 5:17 p.m. I pushed you again on this, and you said to me, we will meet in Israel in 14 weeks, so let us have this conversation there before an audience, rather than repeat points I've already made. Yeah, because you never addressed my questions. You never addressed them. And then when we got to Israel, that's when I challenged you on it, and that's when you confessed. You said to me, well, you know, I watched it, it was on, but I wasn't really paying attention.
Is more clever than many creationists, like Ken Hovind, who I think you have argued with. He does not start by advocating transparently false things like New Earth creationism, for example, but instead he starts by appropriating arguments against sort of classical practice in prebiotic chemistry. And these arguments that actually originated from the scientific community itself. And this is a very good rhetorical strategy for him.
How do you, like, which one specifically?
Well, okay. So, I mean, he has got a nice chart showing that, or saying that all prebiotic chemistry just is a bunch of chemists in the laboratory mixing ultra pure compounds that they bought commercially and under very strict control, making a mess and then extracting from the mess, you know, a few compounds that may have biological relevance, and then claiming that this has something to do with the origin of life. And then his complaint is that the press runs away with this in a way that deceives the public. You know, in 1986, Bob Shapiro, who was an expert in this field, wrote a whole book that made this criticism. He took about 100 pages, several hundred pages to do so.
So it sounds like maybe it had validity in one or two instances within the field, but he's trying to paint it as though it describes the entire field.
Yeah, I mean, scientists are human. I mean, we like our theories also, and we will advocate them. So Bob in 2009, for example, did criticize some of the work that John Sutherland, who's a very prominent individual in this field, did. I mean, Bob's analogy was that John was behaving like a golfer who had played a golf ball around an 18-hole course and then concluded back in the clubhouse that the ball could play the same course in the same way, but propelled not by a rational scientist, but by the wind and the rain. And so some of John's work still suffers from this criticism, and you can still find papers, but most of the rest of the community of people who we would call origins of life, prebiotic chemists, most people take this criticism from Bob Shapiro quite seriously, and we work very hard to not make that criticism apply.
So in regurgitating this criticism, is this a valid contribution on Jim's part, or what do you think?
Well, no, not. I mean, it's always good to not make the press run away and exaggerate claims, but no, Torres starts here, but he ends in a very different place. At least he wants to. He hopes to persuade his audience to conclude that life could not possibly have arisen from non-living matter without a literal miracle. He then wants his audience to conclude that anyone who suggests otherwise is ignorant or lying or stupid or perhaps all three.
Corrupt or, yeah.
You say that I just focus in on the Sutherland type arguments. What about commenting on the things, the interactome question? What about commenting on chiral-induced spin selectivity? All of these are huge, huge problems. And then when I confronted you on it in an email, you didn't respond. When I confronted you on it in Israel in person, you had absolutely no answer because you didn't even know what I was talking about. Then you talk about this little chart that I put in there. I had to rebut the Sutherland type chemistry. I had to because that was in Dave's video. That was Dave's video. You mean like this slide from Dave's part 2 video? These types of pictures that he shows? Yeah, I have to rebut these because this is the Sutherland type pictures. These are the types of arguments that you go through on the synthesis and you say that this has prebiotic relevance. So I have to go through this. So you get upset because I'm just going after the same types of things that Shapiro was talking about in 1986 in his book, and you say the community took the advice of Shapiro and they don't do it anymore. That's not true. People are continuing to do it. Krishnamurthy, Devaraj, Pauner, Hudd, along with Sutherland. You criticized Dave's reliance on Sutherland. What a train wreck for Dave Farina. Dave Farina doesn't even know his whole arguments are imploding, that his own experts are coming on and criticizing Dave Farina's own video that they're even in, and Dave didn't even notice it. Well, in my series, I took a much more recent paper by Reichert in Nature Communications that he published in 2018, where he makes the very same arguments, but you didn't know this because you never watched my video. Here's exactly what I said. Here's where I'm beginning to see some agreement. Clemens Reichert, he wrote an article called Prebiotic Chemistry and the Human Intervention. He writes, such a pure chemical scenario is unrealistic prebiotically, but necessary. Further, he writes, further, the ideal experiment does not involve any human intervention. He is agreeing with me. If you really want to have a prebiotically relevant reaction, you can't buy pure chemicals. It's unrealistic. You got to use the mixtures you come up with. Secondly, the ideal experiment has no human interaction. So they're devising the most amazing things that they can do, and still they're not even coming close. They're still not even making the building blocks of the building blocks. He's seeing exactly what I'm seeing. And he's an origin of life researcher, and he's seeing what I'm seeing. This segment shows that Steve Benner never even watched my video, which he later confessed to when I challenged him to his face. Yet he got on Dave's program and criticized my video series, which he never watched. He was making reference to a 25-minute video that I had made years ago. He wasn't commenting on my series, which he was supposed to be commenting on. And Dave didn't even realize that Benner was criticizing arguments that Dave was putting forth in his own video in support of Origin of Life. Such a train wreck for Dave Farina. And now what we're going to do in this next part is we're going to go right after Steve Benner and his so-called research in Origin of Life. If you're enjoying this series, give us a thumbs up and click the subscribe button, and that way you'll hear when we're coming out with new videos. There are no salaried employees in this organization. All the accounting, all the legal work, that's all done by friends of mine. The only thing that I have to pay for is the production work, and if you could help us out with that, I'd appreciate it. There's a link below where you can just click on that and help us in several different ways. Thank you.